under the light of a full moon at midnight on the 14th of November 2016. A colossal earthquake descended upon the small and bustling town of Kaikoura, tearing structure from foundation, land from sea, and plunging the local area into darkness. The extent of the chaos only apparent as night gave way to dawn. The earthquake, its tsunami, and continually large aftershocks brought havoc throughout the community, both human and wildlife alike.
It typically feels like a big bang. You know, like if you're in your house, like a truck has just hit your house or something like that.
It really just affirmed just how mortal we all are.
There was no way that we were able to predict the Kaikoura earthquake. Even if the fault that it started on, even if you could look at it and say this one was close to rupturing, we had no way of knowing that it was going to do that one, and then rupture this one, and then this one, and then 21 faults later, we were going to have a 7.8 earthquake.
The research, the scientists have discovered so much about the earthquake and what a massive worldwide event it was. It's probably one of the most complex earthquakes the world's ever seen.
They were really strange times. It was kind of like war times. We had fuel rationing, food at the supermarket. Of course, they couldn't get goods in and out, so people were really relying on each other just for those really basic needs.
It was really scary. It was horrible. It's the most terrifying thing that I've ever been through.
New Zealand, known as the land of the long cloud, holds many a wonder to the eye. Situated within the Ring of Fire, its geography gives way to an intricate biological world. Kaikoura, on the east coast of the South Island, is unique due to its proximity from mountains to sea. A land of untouched beauty and thriving marine and coastal wildlife that have made this town their residence. The submarine canyon, just 0.3 miles off the coast, creates the building blocks for a wide diversity of life. This canyon is like any seen from land, with a large valley and smaller stream-like gullies. As you go deeper into the canyon, there comes a change in marine life, a mosaic of different communities throughout the large structure.
What we found in 2006 from doing a survey there was that there is a very rich community that lives within the seafloor. It's lots and lots of animals processing that high carbon environment in which they live in. And they represent a very high biomass, which turns out to be one of the highest biomasses that's been recorded in the deep sea. Some of those organisms include things like polychaete worms, so there's the bristle worms that move in amongst the sediment, also sea cucumbers. The whole ecosystem is in some way connected. The jump from those organisms which live within the seafloor to larger things like squid and whales is perhaps not as straightforward. And those organisms are largely going to feed on animals which live within the water column, not that are associated with the seabed. And so the link there is through the phytoplankton to the zooplankton to small fish, etc., which is then fed on by whales and squid and such like.
Dolphins are a common sight in Kaikoura. Dusky dolphins tend to surface feed in large groups, which synchronises their cooperative foraging and ends in playful aerial displays. They often have their young in the spring, but do not breed every year, as weaning a newborn can take approximately 3 years.
The dusky dolphins are a sort of a medium-sized dolphin. They're not large. They grow to roughly a size of just under 2 metres. The dusky dolphins are one of the most acrobatic of the dolphins.
The other predominant marine mammal found in Kaikoura is the sperm whale. Due to the sperm whale being toothed, they can feed on various species that are available in the Kaikoura Canyon. Their hunting involves diving around the canyon near the 500 to 1,000 metre contour line and using clicks to aid their echolocation to find their food, but also to stun their prey.
Traditionally, it's just the single male bachelors that are here pretty much all year round. And then as they reach maturity, they move away.
Kaikoura is home to a subspecies of seal called fur seals. New Zealand fur seals are very similar in appearance to sea lions, with external ear flaps, a long pointed nose, and hind flippers that rotate forward. They are also smaller than other seal species.
Some of the really large, dominant males can be like a couple of 100 kilos. They go out to sea and they just feed away, come back in peak condition to be able to compete with other males. The females will go out to sea, feed on fish for probably 3 or 4 days sometimes, and they'll leave the pup tucked away, just out in the rocks near a pool generally, and the pups will just lie there. And then they'll come in and they'll suckle it for virtually 2 days constantly. And then all of a sudden they'll stop and they'll go out to sea and to build up reserves. In that time, you end up with a lot of pups that get reported that are really thin, sick, but it's part of a natural process.
The Hutton shearwater, also originally known as the titi, is a bird only found in Kaikoura.
The titi was a significant one. Over the generations, the birds have been frightened into going higher and higher and higher in terms of the ecosystem. Unfortunately, now they only live in the alpine area. We believe right back 1,000 years ago, they were down at sea level.
These breeding colonies, where the birds will dig burrows with their bills and feet, are found in 2 nature reserves in the seaward Kaikoura mountain range. 10 years ago, the Hutton Shearwaters Conservation Trust set up a new colony on the peninsula.
Hutton shearwaters are quite a small seabird. They're about the size of a red-billed gull, but they've got a characteristic black upper side and a white breast and a bit of greying feathers just around under the neck. So Hutton shearwaters are a vital part of Kaikoura and a vital part of New Zealand. It's a species like many in New Zealand that occurs nowhere else in the world.
New Zealand is home to 1/3 of the world's penguin species, with half of these being found nowhere else in the world. Sadly, 10 out of the 18 species of penguin are now under threat of extinction. Blue penguins, or little penguins as they're also known, are the world's smallest penguin subspecies. At a height of 25 centimetres and average weight of 1 kilogram, their name not only denotes their size, but also the colour of their plumage, being a slate blue colour everywhere other than their white belly.
Some people call it the blue penguin or the little penguin, and you get it around Australia and New Zealand. They're a local species, they don't migrate. If you find a penguin, its home range is in this area. So they don't range too far out to sea, they can go a few kilometres out. The young birds are much bluer, they're this really bright iridescent blue. The adults are quite a dark blue with white. So people often see them coming in at night. They form rafts at sea and they're coming in to come ashore, especially during the breeding season. Then you can hear them congregating, assessing the situation on land, is it safe to come ashore.
A fascinating species that thrives in the flourishing environment Kaikoura provides is the paua.
A paua is a shellfish. It's a univalve, which means it's just got one shell that sticks to the rock. A paua is a member of the abalone family, and our version of the abalone, or paua, is black-footed. So it's a round shell with a black foot, a black meat, which is eaten. And inside the shell's kind of what it's probably most well known for, so it's got a very vivid blue and purple and green colour.
The beautiful mountains and rock formations in which these organisms live have all been formed over time by gradual geographic changes, often caused by the movement of tectonic plates.
The whole basics behind why earthquakes happen ultimately comes down to plate tectonics. So the entire surface of the Earth is broken up into these tectonic plates. Some are quite big, like for example the Pacific plate, which pretty much covers the entire Pacific Ocean. And then you have other smaller plates, we can call them microplates, which might be the size of a small country or something. Beneath the North Island, there you have the Pacific plate is pushing down or subducting beneath the Australian plate, as we call it. And so the Kaikoura earthquake happened in the crust that was above where those two plates meet. So you get sort of this competing of one plate going under, one plate going over top, and then these two plates also sliding past one another, and basically everything really crumpling up like a giant car wreck. So in that first day, there certainly would have been thousands of aftershocks. There were certainly at least a couple that were over magnitude 5. There would have been a number of them that were over 6. There was one large block, we're talking like kilometers long block of rock that just seemed to almost pop straight up, by a few meters.
The days following the earthquake, one of the first things that people noticed was the paua that had been lifted out of the water. Mainly they live in about sort of the 2 or 3 metre mark. And with the earthquake and the uplift that happened, which was up to 2 or 3 metres in some places, obviously caused a high mortality of paua in those areas. And also significantly it caused the loss of all that habitat. People realised that there was a lot of paua out of water that we're going to die and could potentially be saved. So there was a lot of paua moved, and we think that the ones that were moved did quite well. Unfortunately, it was really hot and dry days following the earthquake, so those are 2 factors which paua don't really like. So there's a bit of a rush to get them back in the water. It's a natural disaster, and we've had this big mortality, and we need to be very careful how we sort of approach any introduction to fishing again. But the best thing that we can do is to close the fishery, and that's what's happening at the moment. So it's just a matter of being patient and collecting all the data we can and taking it from there.
I was lucky enough to go up to the Ohau Point where the major seal colony is about a week after the quake, just to see what the effects of the quake, the big rock falls had on the major colony up there, because it was just right at the beginning of the pupping season. Just to see how many had been killed. There was very few that you could find. Could have been a lot buried underneath. Areas like down here, there's just far more habitat for them to be on. Like with the uplift in rock, there's far more rock available for them. There's far more pools that are there. So it hasn't made any difference whatsoever to breeding areas apart from what happened at Ohau Point. Yeah, it was. It's fortunate in some ways. The habitat's gone and new habitat's been created in other areas.
Like the fur seals, the earthquake was devastating for seabirds. With rock falls affecting nests of many species, the Hudson shearwaters were devastated by a landslide that may have killed around 25,000 breeding pairs.
There was one huge rock fall, a massive landslip, a bit like a rock glacier that's come down, and that's destroyed about 15% of the breeding area in the larger colony. It's just been wiped out. Unfortunately for the shearwaters, the earthquake hit pretty much at the worst possible time of year. So it occurred when birds were incubating eggs. The shearwaters dig burrows, so at least a male or a female from each pair was sat on the egg underground in a burrow when the earthquake hit.
It came on so quickly. It was a really violent quake, you know, just went boom, like a freight train, and the shaking was so violent, I think very few animals would have had a chance to get away. So any penguins that were nesting at the time, which they probably would have been potentially affected by the earthquake by being crushed by boulders or, you know, buildings lifted and shifted and floorboards and piles moved and all sorts of things happened. So any penguins in that scenario would have been at the very least injured.
So a few months after the earthquake, we had an opportunity at the end of another survey, which was nearby, just to spend one day going back to the canyon to run new video transects over the exact same locations that we'd been to in 2006 to see what the seafloor looked like. And what we saw then was actually nothing. Those animals I talked about earlier would leave little holes and marks on the surface where you could see where they existed beneath the sediment. And now there was none of those. All you could see was a flat, featureless sediment.
The ecosystem overall is connected in many ways. So while the disappearance of the ocean floor caused by the earthquake directly affected smaller animals, cetaceans such as the dusky dolphins and sperm whales found in Kaikoura have also been affected. The resident sperm whales have been recorded spending a longer time diving for prey. The disappearance of the canyon floor had effects of the food chain.
We went back to those first ones where we'd seen everything had been wiped out, and we actually started to see there was some signs of life. There was some little holes in the seafloor. We're now seeing those little features, which give us an indication that life had started to return. So we would hope that there is no species that are going to suffer, if you like, local extinction because of the earthquake, and that it's given enough time, we would expect that most of those organisms which we saw before the earthquake will return and form similar sorts of communities, if not exactly the same, as we saw before. How does the human population respond to a particular disturbance like an earthquake, not only in rebuilding their communities, but also potentially looking after the nature which is around them?
The wildlife, the biodiversity, they're still here in great numbers.
The number of burrows and birds in the areas is down, but there's still a lot of birds there. There's still a lot of digging, there's still loads of birds in at night. So I think they've taken a big knock, but in those areas they're going to slowly recover again.
The seals overall have bounced back, and we won't really know to the full extent until we do a seal pup count.
We know that nature bounces back because it is abundant out there, and there have been many, many earthquakes that have come before this one. So I guess the fact that as humans we are bouncing back as well, I think it's just a testament that life always wants to triumph.
Many people know the obvious threats facing ecosystems on this planet. However, many forget that the disasters affecting the human race also has a lasting impact on the intrinsic needs of the natural world. Hurricanes, earthquakes, war, and nuclear blasts affect every living being. Every day, we are losing up to 200 species. This era of mass extinction is very much related to human activity. But nature, given time and help, can recover. The community of Kaikoura and its wildlife are proving just that. With human intervention, such as a ban on collecting power and the man-made Hutton Shearwater colony, we can hopefully create a buffer. Nature is very elastic and can continue to bounce back where it can.